I want to talk to you today about the number 2 Morse taper in your tail shaft. Now, the Morse taper is simply a tapered hole into which a tapered shank device will go into it. And you probably have it on the headstock too, but we're not going to talk about that because they're both the same, but the tailstock is the one that could present challenges depending on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to do it with, in other words, the tool. This was prompted by a question I had by email. The person was trying to drill a hole in a turning using his tailstock mounted chuck. And as he described the problem, he said that the chuck started rotating when he tried to start drilling the hole. And that brought to mind, well, what could it be? And I thought of a dirty shank on your chuck, or a dirty hole in your tailstock. And but there's also some other features which can cause that to happen. One of them is simply how you go about using it. When you're going to put like a chuck or something else in the tailstock, particularly the chuck, because that's what's going to encounter a torque when you're trying to drill with it, you don't just place it in there. Because if you do that, and you mount your drill in here, whatever you're going to do, and then you start moving this forward, the drill torque will start rotating this in the tailstock. The way you put it in is you line it up and slam it in. That locks it in. That locks the two tapered hole devices together, and the way it ejects is by pulling the shaft of your tailstock back, and there's a pin inside that ejects the shank on your chuck. That also is true of your life center. When you drive this in, the way it comes out is by pulling the tailstock shank back, and that ejects the life center. But problems can arise when you're putting in new tools. If you get something, and here's one in particular, this is another life center. It looks quite similar to the one I just used, but there's a difference. If you line them up and look at the lengths of these two shanks, this one is much shorter than that one. Doesn't seem like that should cause a problem, but it does. When you get something new to use on your tailstock, you should put it in gently and start backing this out until it stops. You should at some point see this start moving out, and I'll show you what it should look like. Let's put this one back in here. I'll put it in gently. Now watch it here as I'm going back. There, this stopped, this kept going back. That means that pin has engaged the back and it's pushed it out. If I were to slam this life center in, I would not be able to get it out because the pin never engages it. I'll put it back here and I can push it in and it'll lock in if I'm not careful. Now there is a way to recover that. For one thing, if you get something new and you put it in your tailstock and you slam it in, you should try to get something like to wedge into this groove. Don't just put a screwdriver there and try to pry it out. That's very bad for the screwdriver, and also is bad on this because the way this wants to disengage is with equal force going axially, nothing sideways. So you can put something in there, both sides, maybe 2 screwdrivers if you're careful, and I really still don't advise it, but I guess you can do it. That will fit into the gap here and allow you to pop that out. But of course you don't want to go through that every time. So what you want to do is lengthen this somehow. And here's an example of one that I did. This one also was too short, and I threaded it and put a a small set screw in there with a nut. Now whenever you put something to extend that, you have to keep in mind that this is a tapered shank. Whatever you put in there at no point can engage this taper. So put a straight edge on it and make sure that this doesn't stick out beyond that tapered line. Because if it does, this will jam into the hole and cause damage. What I did for this guy, remember the short one, you see it's got a hole in there. I used a 1/2 inch dowel and I turned it on the lathe, again with my chuck in the headstock, to fit into this hole. And it'll go in there. Now later I'll probably put some glue on this or something of that sort, maybe the silicone sealant that will adhere to it, so I could pop it out again if I wanted to, because you may want to use that hole to drive out the center point if that ever gets damaged, because that's how that's replaced. So I put this in here, and if you see, I've managed to make sure that there's clearance so this will never touch. Now I can test this the same method. I'll move this tailstock shank forward, place this in, and let's watch this now. There, it just engaged and popped it out. Now that means I could probably cut this down a little bit so that I can get a little more distance here. But it is a way to fix that kind of a problem. And it's also a good way to detect that problem before you back yourself into a corner. When you get something new, place it in there and see if it will eject it when it's in there gently, so you can pull it back out by hand if you had to. That's what I wanted to cover on your Morse taper devices in your tailstock.